We're missing whole chapters in our history. There are 20 mysteries from the ancient world that science still can't fully explain, and they point to a past that's much stranger than what we've been told. These aren't just curiosities, they're deep gaps in the story of human ingenuity. There's a device 2,000 years old that could predict planetary motion. Its gearwork rivals a modern clock. Then there's a medieval map. It shows a continent that's been buried under ice for millions of years. By the end, a hidden pattern starts to emerge. It connects these enigmas. It suggests a lost thread of knowledge running through ancient civilizations. And that raises a question. What does it mean for our understanding of human progress if our ancestors knew more than we give them credit for? Sponge divers found it in the Aegean Sea in clear water. It was on the seafloor among statues and pottery, a corroded lump of bronze and wood about the size of a large book. For decades after, it just sat in a museum, a curiosity, next to more obviously beautiful things. It was only later, when researchers looked closer, peering through that crust of 2,000 years, that they saw it. This wasn't a simple ornament, it was a machine, the Antikythera Mechanism, a clockwork cosmos in a box, built over 2,000 years ago. Inside its wooden case, a system of gears. At least 30 precise bronze gears, all interlocking. You turn a single handle on the side, and that sets it all in motion. Dials on the front and back would spin. Pointers would advance, tiny inscriptions would show the predicted positions, the sun, the moon, the 5 known planets. It could forecast lunar phases. And it could predict eclipses years in advance. This wasn't just a calendar, it was a mechanical computer. It modeled the irregular motions of the heavens. With a mathematical grace that Europe wouldn't see again for over 1,000 years. The sophistication is what baffles you. The device uses differential gearing. A technology we thought was invented in the 16th century. For automobiles and its gears, they're not all simple round wheels. Many are specially shaped. To account for elliptical orbits, a concept formalized by Kepler in the 17th century, the knowledge in its brass is a fusion, advanced astronomy. Precise mathematics, masterful craftsmanship. It speaks of a school of engineering, a tradition of making that history has entirely forgotten. So why does it feel so isolated? Mainstream archaeology often calls it an anomaly, a one-off, a genius invention, but machines this advanced, they don't come from a vacuum, they come from a culture. A culture that understands metallurgy, mathematics, long-term observation. They imply textbooks, workshops, apprentices, a demand for such devices, and yet we've found no blueprints, no mention in texts of such an industry, no other examples. It's like finding a single smartphone in a medieval castle with no evidence of the internet, or the factories or the global economy needed to create it. The mechanism suggests a peak, a technological peak in the ancient Hellenistic world, one we've barely begun to search for. Its silent gears ask a question. What else did they know that we're still struggling to rediscover? The Antikythera Mechanism was a peak of mechanical genius. But then there's a different kind of peak, a peak of pure thought, unreadable thought. In a vault at Yale, there's a book no one can read. It's the Voynich Manuscript. A small, dense book, about 240 pages, bound in vellum, and its pages are filled, edge to edge, with this flowing script, elegant, an alphabet of strange, looping characters. It looks like writing. It has all the patterns of a real language, but it doesn't match anything we know. Not Latin, not Arabic, not any known cipher. And then there are the illustrations, just as baffling, page after page of plants that have never grown on Earth, tubers and leaves in impossible combinations. Diagrams of celestial spheres, but with unfamiliar constellations. networks of pipes and vessels. They look like biological systems, or maybe alchemical. And then the most haunting part, pages of nude women, bathing in or connected by these strange green tubes, fluid-filled tubes. It feels like a textbook. A manual for a world we don't recognize. Scientific testing dated the vellum to the early 15th century. The ink is from that period, so it's not a modern forgery. It's a genuine medieval artifact. For over a century, the best cryptographers have tried to crack it. Military codebreakers from both world wars, top linguists. Recently, powerful artificial intelligence. All have failed. The patterns resist every known method. That consistent failure has led some to dismiss it. To call it an elaborate hoax, a medieval art project meant to confuse, but that explanation feels hollow when you look at it. The manuscript shows careful, consistent authorship. The script has statistical properties of real languages. The illustrations, while bizarre, are drawn with purpose, a systematic intent. So what if it's not a hoax? What if it's a fossil of a completely different way of organizing knowledge? Maybe it's from a lost culture, a school of thought that was deliberately erased. Or maybe it's a highly personalized cipher, meant for a single reader, a king or a mystic with a key long lost to time. Its existence is a quiet rebellion. We assume the medieval mind was limited to what's in our history books, to known herbals, familiar astrology. The Voynich Manuscript suggests otherwise. It suggests there were currents of thought, systems of botany, cosmology, so alien we can't even begin to parse their logic. It sits there in its climate-controlled case, holding a secret. Is it nonsense or is it a message? And if it is a message, who was it meant for? And why does its language remain so stubbornly, perfectly silent? There's this object in the basement of the National Museum of Iraq. A clay jar about the size of a fist. It's sealed with asphalt, and sticking through that seal is an iron rod inside a copper cylinder. It was found near Baghdad. And it's old, from somewhere between 250 years before the Common Era to 250 years after. For a long time, it was just a storage jar. Maybe for scrolls, but in the 1930s, a German archaeologist saw it differently. He saw the iron rod, the copper cylinder, the insulator between them, all inside a sealed container. And he said this wasn't for storage. This was a battery, a primitive cell, and he was right. If you make a replica, fill it with something acidic like vinegar, it produces a current. About 1 volt, it's weak, but it's there. That changes things. We're taught that harnessing electricity starts with Volta, with Faraday, in the 18th and 19th centuries. The idea that a Parthian artisan understood this 2,000 years ago seems impossible, so the easy explanation is to dismiss it. They must have been for scrolls, even though some jars have acidic residue inside. The design is just a coincidence, but what if it wasn't? What if this was an application of something they knew? Ancient goldsmiths did fine metalwork. Could that weak current have been used for electroplating, to put a thin layer of gold on silver? Experiments show it's possible, and there are texts from the region that talk about medical treatments. Using electric fish to ease pain. Could these jars have produced a controlled sensation for therapy? The point isn't that they powered cities. The point is the curiosity gap. These artifacts have been known for almost a century, and there's been no large-scale scientific effort to look for evidence of their use. No systematic testing of metal objects for electroplating. No deep look at the texts with this possibility in mind. They just sit in that basement, a quiet question. Were they just jars, or are they proof of a technology that was lost because nobody thought to look for the wires? The Baghdad Battery is one thing. It pushes on the timeline of invention, but there's a map drawn in Constantinople that pushes on the whole timeline of exploration. In 1513, an Ottoman admiral, Piri Reis, he put together a world map. He said he used older charts. Some of them, he said, went back to Alexander the Great. The map itself is on gazelle skin, beautiful, intricate. It shows Europe, Africa, the Eastern Americas with a lot of detail, but then there's the bottom section. A landmass that curls up from the southern edge. To a modern eye, the shape is unmistakable. It's the coastline of Antarctica. Antarctica wasn't found until 1820. That's the first problem. The bigger problem is what the map shows. It doesn't show Antarctica under ice, which is how it is now, over a mile of ice. It shows the coastline, the actual coastline, the rocky shore of the continent, as if the ice wasn't there. Geology says that ice has covered Antarctica completely for 15 million years. At least, so the question becomes very simple. Who mapped it, who sailed there and charted that land at a time when, by what we know, human civilization didn't exist? The map is like a ghost, a cartographic echo of a world that shouldn't be known. The admiral's notes say he used source maps from the Library of Alexandria. Before it was lost, that pushes the knowledge back even further, into deep antiquity, so you wonder, could there have been an ancient seafaring culture? During a warm period, a brief interglacial window when the coasts were exposed, some researchers point to core samples. They suggest parts of the coast might have been ice-free as recently as 6,000 years ago. A sliver of possibility, but that still means a civilization advanced enough to mount a mapping expedition to the end of the Earth, and then for all record of that civilization to vanish. Leaving only a trace on one medieval map, the map forces a choice between two unsettling ideas. Either our geological models of Antarctica's deep freeze are wrong. They offer a tiny window for human eyes to see it, or our models of human history are wrong, missing an entire chapter of exploration and science. The Piri Reis Map isn't just an old drawing. It's a piece of evidence. It sits in a museum in Istanbul, and it insists quietly that the world and our past were once a very different place. The map points to a lost age of global knowledge. But some mysteries are anchored in one place, a testament to local genius, an obsession with form. In the jungles of Costa Rica, in the Diquis Delta, there are stones that don't belong. They aren't jagged, they aren't random, they're round, perfectly round, hundreds of them, from the size of a melon up to giants, over 8 feet across. Weighing more than 16 tons, they're carved from solid granite, and the precision is startling. Many are within a few millimeters of a perfect sphere. They were made by a pre-Columbian people between 300 and 1500 years ago, and then, for reasons we can't see, they were placed, carefully placed. In lines, in triangles, in geometric patterns across the jungle floor. The how is its own puzzle. Granite is brutally hard. They had no metal tools. Researchers think they used fire to heat the stone, then water to cool it rapidly. To fracture it, then pecking and grinding with other stones. The process for one large sphere could have taken a generation, but the why is the deeper mystery. Why devote that kind of effort, that communal effort to perfect shapes? Local oral history has clues. Some legends say the spheres were navigational aids, a line to point the way. Others say they were models of celestial bodies, a map of the stars placed on the earth. A few were found in patterns that mirror constellations, which points to a culture that saw a connection between geometry in the heavens and geometry on the ground. The spheres were more than art, they were a statement. A physical manifestation of an idea. That perfection and cosmic order could be brought into the human world through immense effort and skill. Yet despite their significance, they haven't gotten the scientific scrutiny you'd expect. No widespread use of ground-penetrating radar to see if they mark buried structures. No advanced material analysis to trace quarry sources or tool marks. Many were moved by bulldozers in the 20th century. their original arrangements lost. That neglect makes them a different kind of forgotten mystery. Not forgotten by locals, but overlooked by the broader narrative of ancient technology. We study the pyramids for their engineering. The spheres represent an engineering feat of a different kind. A feat of patience, of communal purpose, and of an artistic vision so powerful it commanded the reshaping of the earth itself. They sit in the tropical heat. Silent and heavy, each one a world in miniature, a testament to a culture that looked at a block of stone and saw not an obstacle but a hidden perfect form. Waiting to be revealed, a perfect sphere shows order, earthly order, but then you have an object that says it's a record of something not from Earth at all. That's the Dropa stones. It's one of the most argued over stories and one of the hardest to see clearly. In 1938, there was an expedition. Archaeologists were in the Bayan Karaula Mountains. That's on the border of China and Tibet. They went into a cave system, and inside they found something strange. It wasn't bones, it wasn't normal tools. It was hundreds of stone discs. Each one was about a foot wide, with a hole in the center. They looked like stone records, phonograph records, and on the surface, from the edge to the center, there were tiny grooves. A spiral of grooves, and when you looked closer, those grooves were supposed to be writing, microscopic hieroglyphics, a writing system no one could read. That's where the story splits. What happened next? According to the tale, the writing was finally translated. It told a story. It said these were the records of a people called the Dropa. And that 12,000 years ago, their spacecraft crashed. In these mountains, they were stranded. They couldn't fix their ship. They couldn't go home. Now, the official position is very clear. Mainstream archaeology says it's a hoax. No major museum has these discs. The original researchers are hard to pin down. The evidence chain is broken. For science, the case is closed. It's a modern myth, from mistranslation, from sensationalism. But that dismissal is worth stopping at. Because inside this controversial story, there's another mystery, a quieter one. It's about what we decide to look into and what we decide to ignore. The basic claim is that physical objects were found, stone discs. If they were real, what were they? Even if the translation is fantasy, the objects aren't. Could they have been a ritual object, a way of keeping records with spiral grooves, an ancient accounting tool? We'll never know, because no institution with modern tools ever got to study one. A confirmed Dropa stone. If they existed, they vanished into private hands or they were lost. The whole subject was pushed to the fringe, so completely that any real inquiry became impossible. That's the pattern the story shows. When an artifact doesn't fit, when its story is too strange, the whole topic becomes taboo. It isn't investigated. It's ridiculed, and in that ridicule, a door closes. We lose the chance to ask simpler questions, grounded questions. What were these mountain people trying to preserve? What technology, ordinary to them, made those precise grooves? The wild story about alien visitors works like a smokescreen. It hides a possible real discovery. About a lost mountain culture and their craftsmanship. So the legacy of the Dropa stones, real or not, is a lesson in caution. Not caution about believing wild claims, but caution about the opposite, the danger of letting a wild claim stop us from asking ordinary questions, questions that might reveal something. It leaves a cloud of doubt. A permanent question mark over a remote cave, and over what, if anything, was ever really found there. There are these stones in Ica, Peru, thousands of them. In a private collection, they're made of andesite, which is a hard, gray volcanic rock, and they're covered in engravings, completely covered, intricate ones. The scenes are what stop you. There are human figures, but they're interacting with creatures that shouldn't exist, dinosaurs, detailed, lifelike dinosaurs. Not as monsters, but as animals, being ridden or hunted or studied. Other stones show something else, what look like advanced medical operations, heart transplants. Caesarean sections, tools that resemble telescopes, maps of unknown continents. The detail is specific, almost technical. The standard explanation is definitive. They're modern forgeries. A local farmer in the 1960s said he found them in a cave. He later admitted to carving many himself to sell to tourists. For mainstream science, the case is closed. A hoax, an elaborate one, but a hoax. But the story has wrinkles. Before the farmer's admission, some of these stones were documented. In collections from the 16th century, Spanish chronicles mention engraved stones from the region. A subset were found in undisturbed burials that predate the modern era by centuries. So the uncomfortable question lingers. What if not all of them are fake? What if a core group is genuine and the forgeries were made later to cash in on the mystery? The implication of the genuine stones, if they exist, is staggering. They wouldn't just be curiosities, they'd be evidence that the people of ancient Peru had knowledge. Knowledge of anatomy far beyond their time, knowledge of creatures that vanished 65 million years before humans walked the earth. It challenges two frameworks at once: the timeline of human technology and the timeline of life on the planet. The scientific dismissal is understandable. The forgery claim taints everything. But that dismissal has a cost. It has prevented any large-scale, impartial study. No effort to date the patina in the engraving lines of the oldest stones. No geological analysis to see if the andesite matches local pre-Columbian quarries. The entire category has been placed in a box labeled nonsense and shelved. So the Ica stones remain in a kind of limbo, a paradox. They are either one of the most audacious hoaxes in history, or they are fragments of a forgotten understanding. An understanding so profound it rewrites our past. Their silent gallery poses a challenge, not just to history but to our methods. How do we investigate something that has been so thoroughly discredited? When does caution become a refusal to see? The stones, real or not, force a confrontation with the boundaries of our own curiosity. They ask what we are willing to re-examine. And what we have decided, perhaps too soon, must never be true. The Ica stones are one kind of mystery about knowledge, but then there are these other mysteries. About scale, about pure effort. In Laos, on a plateau called Xing Quang, the landscape is dotted with giants. These jars, thousands of them, carved from solid stone. Some are over 10 feet tall, they weigh tons, and they're ancient, from the Iron Age, more than 1,000 years old. They're scattered across the hills. In clusters, some groups have hundreds, just sitting there under the jungle, their rims open to the sky, silent, massive. So the first question, what were they for? The local name gives a clue, the Plain of Jars. Oral tradition says they were for brewing rice wine, for a great victory feast. Other stories say they collected rainwater for trade caravans, but the most persistent theory is different, more solemn, that they were for the dead, that they held remains, or that bodies were placed inside for a sky burial. A return and research has found some evidence, bone fragments, ceramic offerings, which suggests a ceremonial use, rituals of remembrance, but that just makes the puzzle deeper. Who were these people? There are no written records, no carvings on the jars to tell us. The craftsmanship itself is incredible. They were shaped from sandstone and granite, probably with iron tools or harder stones, and then they were moved uphill across rough terrain. The logistics are hard to grasp. How do you move a 10-ton stone jar? And why put them in these specific, isolated spots? The sites aren't random. They're chosen on ridges, near mountain passes, along what might have been ancient routes. What's striking is how little we know. Unlike Stonehenge or the pyramids, these jars haven't had a major modern investigation. The region's history of conflict in the last century made it hard for archaeologists to work. So a fundamental tool hasn't really been used here: LiDAR. That technology uses lasers from the air to see through the forest canopy. It could reveal everything hidden below. It could show if the jars mark lost settlements, or if they're connected by unseen paths. It could map the whole system, but that large-scale survey hasn't happened. So they remain, these immense open vessels. They aren't temples to a god, they aren't palaces for a king. They feel more communal, more intimate. Each one represents a collective effort for a purpose that was vital to them, whether to honor the dead, sustain the living, or mark a sacred geography. They're a testament to a culture that invested its greatest labor not in walls but in these containers. Their silence is profound. They hold no treasure, no inscriptions, just space, and that empty space asks the loudest question. What was so important that it required carving the earth into these forms? The answer is still out there, waiting in the soil. The jars in Laos are a monument to the unseen, but in Peru, there's a monument that asks to be seen from the sky. The Nazca Lines, they're not hidden. They're laid out across this huge desert plateau, enormous shapes, straight lines that run for miles, perfectly straight. Triangles, trapezoids, and then the figures: a hummingbird with its wings out, a spider, a monkey with a coiled tail, a humanoid figure some call the astronaut. These aren't small, they're colossal. Some are over 600 feet across. They were made by taking the dark, sun-baked stones off the surface, showing the lighter earth underneath. A simple technique, but the scale and precision change it. For a long time, the focus was on cataloging what they are. The mystery was just a riddle. Why would people make art they could never see? The ancient Nazca had no flight, so the answers usually involved ritual. Maybe they were paths for ceremonies. Offerings to gods who could see from above, but that feels like just the first layer. It explains the intention, but not the mechanism of the mind. The deeper mystery is the how. The engineering. How do you plot a perfectly straight line for 5 miles over rough ground without a reference point in the sky? How do you scale up a complex animal to that size without it distorting? Recent experiments point to small-scale models, a master design on a manageable scale. Then they probably used a system of stakes and ropes to transfer the proportions. A low-tech but brilliant use of geometry. It suggests a society with advanced surveyors, master geometers, people who thought in huge scales and abstract shapes. And just when we thought we'd mapped it all, technology showed us how little we knew. With drones and satellites, researchers have found hundreds more lines and figures in recent years. The complex is much bigger than we thought. It wasn't just a few artworks, it was a whole language written on the land, a system that suggests the purpose wasn't just occasional ritual. It may have been a continuous, evolving project, a fundamental part of how their culture related to the landscape itself. Science has been slow to get past the initial wonder. The focus on the what has overshadowed the deeper questions of cognitive process. What did it mean to live in a world you were actively marking with such grand, invisible signatures? How did that shape their identity, their astronomy, their idea of space? The lines might be a terrestrial mirror of celestial patterns. Some align with solstice sunrises. Others may point to water sources, the most precious thing in the desert. The Nazca Lines are a testament to a different kind of intelligence, not just artistic but spatial and mathematical. They represent a dialogue between a people and the empty canvas of their world. A dialogue on a scale so grand it required faith in a viewpoint beyond their own. They're a reminder that some of humanity's greatest works aren't meant to be owned by a single glance, but to define a place for generations, seen only by the horizon, the sun, and time. Sacsayhuamán, this fortress above Cusco, the walls don't run straight, they zigzag like stone teeth set into the ridge, and the stones, these huge limestone blocks. Some are taller than a person, over 100 tons. Each one is a unique shape, polygonal with all these angles, but they fit together perfectly. The joints are seamless. You can't slip a paper between them, not even a razor blade. It's a giant puzzle, a three-dimensional puzzle on an impossible scale. The story is the Inca built it in the 15th century for ceremony and defense. Their stonework is famous, but this is different. It's inexplicable. The precision, the stones aren't just stacked, they're interlocked. Each block has hollows that match the bumps on the next one. There's no straight mortar line. The whole wall is one mass. It can survive the earthquakes here. The engineering is flawless, but the process, that's a blank space. The Inca had no iron. No steel, they had bronze, but that's too soft for cutting limestone like this. They had no wheels, no pulleys. The quarries are miles away, across steep, rough ground. So the questions, how were these megaliths cut? How were they moved uphill? How were they placed with such hair's breadth accuracy? Archaeology has theories. They say maybe they used harder stones to pound the blocks into shape, log rollers, earthen ramps, but it's speculation. When you stand there, those answers feel thin. The precision suggests something more, something beyond brute force. It suggests a deep knowledge of the stone itself. That's where the mystery goes deeper. Into lost technique, local stories talk about other things, a plant sap that could soften stone so you could mold it, or a knowledge of sound, specific frequencies that could resonate with the rock, make it pliable. Science dismisses that as folklore, and because it sounds strange, no one really investigates it, not with serious, open-minded research. That's the real gap. The lack of a focused study. No major project has tried to replicate the work using only the tools archaeology says they had. No one's done a full material analysis, looking for chemical traces of some softening agent. The acoustic ideal, it's just speculation, never tested properly at the site. So Sacsayhuamán is a monument to two mysteries. The first is the engineering. The second, the knowledge. It hints at a school of stonework so advanced we can't see its principles. It might have been a tactile science, passed from master to apprentice, never written down. A science that understood stone not as an obstacle, but as a material with a voice, one you could persuade to fit its neighbor. The walls are silent teachers. They don't speak of kings or gods. They speak of geometry, patience, a harmony between human intention and earthly material that we've forgotten. They're a question. Carved into the mountain, waiting for us to learn how to ask it. The island of Yonaguni ends in a sheer cliff underwater. 60 feet down, the rock doesn't look natural. It rises in these huge, flat platforms, sharp 90-degree angles, straight, parallel steps. There's a central pillar, and on one wall, the outline of a face like a weathered statue. The whole thing is the size of a pyramid, a complex of terraces and channels. It feels architectural. It feels like a place. The debate has been frozen for decades. On one side, the geologists, they point to the rock. It's sandstone, and sandstone fractures along straight plains. The tidal currents here are strong. They could carve these shapes over millennia. Natural processes can create regular forms. The whole structure could be a fantastic accident. On the other side are those who see the human hand. They point to specific things, 2 round holes drilled into the rock, a trench that encircles the base like it was quarried, the sheer accumulation of right angles and parallel lines in one spot. It stretches coincidence. If it is natural, it's nature mimicking a grand plaza with an eerie faithfulness. The true mystery isn't just what it is, but when. Sea levels were lower during the last ice age. This site would have been above water on a coastal plain over 10,000 years ago. That timeline is the seismic part. If it's human, it predates the earliest known complex societies in Japan by thousands of years. It would point to a builder culture in the Pacific, at a time when we believe humans were only just beginning to settle into villages. Yet the investigation has never matched the scale of the question. There have been dives, but few large, funded expeditions with the tools to settle it. No systematic core sampling to look for tool marks, no extensive mapping of the seafloor around it to see if it's part of something larger. The scientific conversation reached an impasse and stopped. A standoff between two possibilities, with no one mounting the definitive effort to prove either one, so the monument just sits there in the blue twilight. A silent, colossal maybe. It's either a geological wonder or it's a sunken page from a prehistory we never knew. Its limbo is a choice to leave a mystery unsolved. Because answering it demands a costly, difficult search, one that challenges established timelines. It languishes not because the answer is unknowable, but because the question is too disruptive to pursue with full force. Every right angle is a whisper from a time when the shore was far away, asking if we are brave enough to rewrite the first chapter. The silent terrors of Yonaguni are a question underwater, and then there's Easter Island, the Moai. Those huge faces are a famous mystery, but the picture we know hides a different puzzle. A physics puzzle. How do you move a statue that weighs 70 tons, as tall as a building, across miles of rough ground? The common answer is a story now. They walked them with ropes, rocking them side to side, moving them forward. It's a good image, but when people tried it with real copies, the story fell apart. The statues broke. They have heavy bases, a high center of gravity. They fractured. The roads tell something else. The Moai roads, they aren't flat. They're often worn down, concave, with raised edges. That suggests the statues weren't walked. They were laid down, dragged on a sled or on rollers, but that idea has problems too. The island had limited things. Not many big trees for rollers. Dragging that weight would have torn up the land in a way you don't fully see. The scale of the problem is huge. It wasn't moving one. It was moving nearly 900, a project across generations that takes more than muscle. It takes a society with master engineers, surveyors to plan the routes, managers to organize hundreds of people to feed them for work that could take years for one statue. This points to a structured culture, a sophisticated one, with a single, strong purpose. That purpose is the other mystery. We call it ancestor worship, but that phrase can just fill space. It doesn't explain the details. Why this form, this long, stern face? Why put them on these massive platforms, the Ahu, facing inward, watching the villages? New work suggests a deeper role. Many Ahu are aligned precisely, not just to sunrise, to specific sky events, the solstices, the rising of stars they used for navigation, for their calendar. The statues weren't just memorials. They could have been markers, anchors in a kind of cosmic map. They linked the people to the sky and to their ancestors in one stone gaze. Then there's the collapse story, a society that pushed too far, cut the last tree for this project and fell. But that story is being looked at again. New clues point to a more complicated decline, tied to environmental shifts, contact with outsiders. The real mystery of the Moai isn't that they exist. It's their context. They are the visible part of a lost system. A system of engineering, astronomy, social unity so strong it could turn a whole island into a sacred monument. Our tests to move them keep falling short of the efficiency the history implies. That gap is where the lost knowledge is, not a secret trick, a whole understanding of materials, land, and human teamwork we haven't put back together. The Moai stand or lie fallen as proof of a capability that seems simple from far away. Close up, the how and the why fade into the ocean mist. It reminds you an island can hold a civilization's entire soul, cut into stone, waiting for us to learn the language of how it moved. Göbekli Tepe is a hill in southeastern Turkey. On the surface, it's barren, but underneath there's a ring of stones, massive T-shaped pillars made of limestone. Each one weighs 20 tons. They were carved, and on them a whole collection of animals, foxes, scorpions, vultures, lions. The artistry is fluid, startling. These aren't crude marks, they're masterful reliefs full of motion, and they are incredibly old. The site dates to about 9,600 BC. That's over 11,500 years ago. This complex was already ancient when Stonehenge was built. It predates pottery, it predates agriculture, it predates village life as we know it. That's the seismic fact. The builders weren't farmers, they weren't from a town. According to the old story, they were nomadic hunter-gatherers, people who should have been focused on survival. On following herds, not on quarrying these megaliths, not on moving them, not on a coordinated project that took generations. The mystery is the why. What compelled them? The standard story is the Neolithic Revolution. It says farming came first. Agriculture created a food surplus. That surplus allowed for specialization. So people could become artists or priests or builders. That led to complex society, and then to monumental architecture and organized religion. Göbekli Tepe flips that sequence. Here, the temple came first, the complex art came first, the large-scale social organization to build it came first, and then, maybe, agriculture followed. There's evidence of early wheat cultivation in the region around the same time. It's as if the need to feed the people gathering at this sacred site drove the invention of farming. The purpose of the place is written in stone, but it's unreadable. The pillars are arranged in circles. Many of the T-shapes are abstract human figures. Arms and hands carved in relief, they stand like silent witnesses facing the center. The animals covering them aren't peaceful, they're powerful, wild. Often dangerous. This wasn't a place of domestic comfort. It feels like a place of ritual, of memory, of confronting the raw forces of the world. The sophistication here is what's hard to integrate. The carvings show an advanced symbolic language, a shared mythology, a capacity to plan and execute that rewrites our model of the prehistoric mind. It suggests the drive to create meaning, to build something larger than oneself, might be the original catalyst for civilization. Not economics, not practicality, but a shared story, carved in stone, calling people together across generations. Göbekli Tepe stands as a quiet challenge. It asks us to reconsider the deepest roots of who we are. Did society begin not with a granary, but with a gathering, not with a harvest, but with a holy place? The pillars hold their silence, but their existence shouts a new question across the millennia. The stones at Göbekli Tepe are a circle, a sacred gathering place. But some ancient builders thought in lines, straight lines, long and relentless. In Brittany, on the coast of France, there's a forest of stone, not trees. Granite, they call it the Karnak Alignments. It's not one monument, it's thousands, over 3,000 standing stones, menhirs there in rows, dozens of parallel lines. Stretching for kilometers across the countryside, like a vast army frozen. Some stones are small, knee-high, others loom overhead, twice a person's height. And they're old, erected over 6,000 years ago, Neolithic. They predate the pyramids. They're contemporaries of the earliest Stonehenge, but it's a different story. The first shock is the scale. It's the number moving 3,000 granite blocks, a generational task, but it's also the planning. The rows are precise. They keep their alignment over hills, across valleys and streams. This wasn't haphazard. It was a project with a vision that needed surveyors who could think in straight lines across complex terrain. The logistics mean a society with remarkable organization, a shared purpose strong enough to coordinate labor across a whole region, probably for centuries. So the purpose, the stones themselves give no written answer. They're mute, but their form invites speculation. The most enduring theory is astronomical. Some researchers see the primary rows aligned with the rising sun at the solstices, a giant calendar marking the year's turning points for an agricultural society. Others suggest something more esoteric. The granite contains quartz, which is piezoelectric. It generates a tiny charge under pressure. Could these alignments have been a primitive earthquake detector? The stones acting as markers for seismic energy in the ground. It's a fringe idea, but it speaks to the depth of the mystery. We're grasping for any explanation that fits such deliberate, large-scale placement. Yet for all their grandeur, the Karnak Alignments lack Stonehenge's global fame. They haven't had the same scientific scrutiny, no decades-long project to map every stone with lasers, to model the sightlines, to survey the entire area with ground-penetrating radar. The puzzle remains in its pieces. This neglect is itself a mystery. Why does one stone circle capture the world, while this larger, more complex landscape lingers in obscurity? The alignments suggest something profound about Neolithic Europe, a culture or a network of cultures with a unified cosmological vision. Building in lines over such distances implies a different relationship with the land than circles. It's about connection, linking points on the horizon, about processions maybe, a ceremonial journey from one end to the other under the watchful presence of the stones. It feels like a physical path on the earth and in the mind. Walking among them now, the silence is full of questions. What knowledge of geometry, of astronomy, of social cohesion did these people have to execute such a plan? The Karnak alignments aren't a single statement. They're a sustained argument written in granite across the landscape, an argument for a forgotten chapter of human ambition, where the goal wasn't to enclose a space but to define a direction, to draw a line from the present into the eternal, and to walk it generation after generation until the earth remembered their passage. The lines of Karnak are there, these stones placed in a pattern across the land, but in China you have the opposite, a pattern made by taking things away. It's 1992 and farmers in Longyou village are draining a pond. The water goes down and then it's gone, and underneath there's a staircase. Cut right into the stone, they go down, and it's not just one room, it's 24 huge caves all carved by hand, over 30,000 square meters underground. That's bigger than 4 football fields, all of it dug out. To make that space, they had to remove 1 million cubic meters of rock. That's a small mountain's worth of stone. And this was done at least 2,000 years ago, maybe older. These aren't natural caves they used, they're built. The ceilings are flat, held up by these huge pillars they left standing. The walls have these marks, parallel chisel marks, all at a 70-degree angle from the floor all the way up. Every single chamber has the same marks. That's a signature. It means a workforce, an organized project. This took decades, maybe centuries, but in all the Chinese records there's nothing, no mention. No decree, no story, no poem about it. It's a complete silence. So what was it for? The ideas don't quite fit. A tomb, but no bodies or artifacts. A mine, but the stone isn't valuable. A military storehouse, but the design feels too grand for that. Some people talk about the sound, the way it echoes in there. Maybe a ceremony, but for what? The caves don't say. The bigger mystery might be how. The precision shows a plan, real engineering. They knew how to keep the ceiling from falling, but the practical things, light, air, getting the rubble out, feeding all those workers, we don't know how they solved that. Which leads to another question. Why isn't there a big study of this place? It's one of the largest ancient underground sites anywhere, and it's barely been looked at. No full laser map, no modern dating of the tool marks, no search for where they put all that rock. It's just sitting there, a marvel that's being ignored. These caves are a testament, but to what? A society that could do this could do a lot. They're not just empty rooms, they're a shape made by intention. A mountain turned into a monument of nothing. A space built maybe not to hold things, but to hold an idea so big it took generations to carve out. And then everyone forgot. It's just waiting down there in the dark. The silent caves of Longyou were carved by an unknown hand. But then there's the Taklamakan Desert, a place whose name means the place of no return. It's this vast, arid basin in western China. In the early 20th century, explorers started finding graves. Simple graves marked with wood, and inside the bodies weren't skeletons, they were preserved perfectly. The dry, salty sand had mummified them, their skin, their hair, their clothing all intact. They looked as if they'd just closed their eyes, but their faces were the shock. High cheekbones, long noses, light-colored hair. They looked distinctly Caucasian. And they were old, dating back to at least 1800 years before the Common Era. That's 1,000 years before the Silk Road connected east and west. 1,000 years before history says such people should be there. These are the Tarim Mummies. Their existence is a quiet earthquake. They were found with their belongings. Felt hats, tartan woolen cloth, woven in patterns that feel Celtic, simple tools. They were a pastoral people, herders. They settled in an oasis on the edge of a brutal desert. And a question hangs in the dry air. What brought them there? A migration, a journey of thousands of miles from the west, maybe following rivers that have long since vanished. Seeking new pastures or fleeing something, conflict, drought, we don't know. That settlement in such a harsh place speaks of incredible resilience, or of having no other choice. Genetic studies confirm it. They have strong links to populations from the Black Sea region, from Siberia. They are not closely related to the East Asian peoples who would later dominate the region. They are strangers in a land that would become very different. This fact alone rewrites maps. It shows the prehistoric world was a tapestry of movement long before the empires we study. Peoples were crossing continents, exchanging not just goods but genes and ideas, in epochs we thought were static, yet their story remains a sidebar. It hasn't been woven into the mainstream story of Eurasian development. The textbook tale often presents ancient China as developing in isolation until the Silk Road opened. These mummies prove that isolation is a myth. They were there, living, weaving, raising families for centuries. They likely interacted with neighboring cultures, trading, perhaps influencing early technologies in ways we haven't traced. Their end is as mysterious as their beginning. By the first millennium before the Common Era, their distinct culture seems to fade. Did they assimilate into the larger populations moving in? Were they displaced? Did the environment finally become too unforgiving? Their resting places offer no final answer. They are biological time capsules. They carry in their cells and clothing a story of human adaptability and connection that challenges our neat categories of East and West. They beg for more. More genetic sampling across Asia to trace their influence. More linguistic analysis to see if echoes of their language survive. They are not just curiosities under glass. They are emissaries from a forgotten bridge between worlds. Their preserved faces ask us to redraw the lines, to see the past not as separate civilizations growing in bubbles, but as a constant, slow, brave intermingling under a vast and watchful sky. In Visoko, Bosnia, there are these hills. They rise up from the valley. To most people, they just look like hills, steep, forested, symmetrical hills. But to some researchers, they look like something else, something built. They're called the Bosnian pyramids. The claim is that they're not natural, that they're the largest pyramids on Earth, made by a lost civilization more than 10,000 years ago. The biggest one, the Pyramid of the Sun, would be much larger than the Great Pyramid of Giza. The evidence is a set of anomalies. There are tunnel networks underneath, like the Ravni tunnels. They look like they were cleared out and supported a long time ago. On the hillsides, some of the stone blocks have flat faces, sharp angles. They feel work. Some material samples have been analyzed, and they suggest a kind of concrete, a man-made material. Proponents talk about energy readings too, beams of ultrasound or electromagnetic energy coming from the peaks, aligning with stars. Mainstream science dismisses it. Geologists say the hills are natural formations called flatirons. They're common in areas with sedimentary rock. The angular blocks are from natural fracturing. The tunnels could be old mines or natural karst features. The scientific establishment has mostly refused to do a large-scale investigation with the alternative researchers. Papers aren't published in the major journals, invitations aren't extended, so you get this standoff. The site becomes a kind of test. What you see depends on what you already believe. And that's the deeper thing here. It's not just about whether the pyramids are real. It's about why the conversation is so split, why this site gets such a strong, immediate rejection from academics. It's a fundamental clash. On one side, you have conventional archaeology, rigid, evidence-based, building slowly on confirmed data. On the other side, alternative history. More intuitive, pattern-seeking, willing to leap at possibilities. The pyramids challenge a timeline, but also a method. They threaten funding, careers, textbooks. To take them seriously is a professional risk, so the site sits in a kind of purgatory, dismissed by mainstream science as pseudoscience, championed by independent researchers who don't have the resources for definitive proof. The middle ground isn't really explored. A sober, unbiased investigation, a full LiDAR survey, core drilling, an international panel working together. That could probably settle it, but it would require both sides being willing to be wrong. Whether natural or artificial, these hills hold a lesson about knowledge. Our paradigms, our accepted stories, they act as filters. They decide not just what we know, but what we're willing to consider knowing. The controversy itself is the artifact. A modern monument to how hard it is to see something new when it contradicts the map we already have. The pyramids, if they are pyramids, might not be made of concrete. They might be made of questions, and those questions are still waiting for an answer that isn't afraid of what it might find. Inside the Hathor temple at Dendera, there's a carving on a wall. It's not like the other hieroglyphs. It shows this long, bulb-shaped object, glass-like, and inside it, a snake runs the whole length, its head touching the tip. This bulb sits on a pillar. From the base, a kind of cable goes to a box, and a kneeling figure is holding that box. Another figure stands nearby, gesturing. To a modern viewer, it's striking. It looks exactly like an electric light bulb. The snake is the filament, the box is the battery, the pillar is the socket. But Egyptology has a different reading. It's rooted in myth. They say it shows the lotus flower emerging from the primordial waters. The snake is the god Harsomptus, born from the lotus, representing life and divine power. The box is the Jed pillar for stability. The whole scene is symbolic, a religious narrative. That's the established scholarly view, and it fits with everything we know about their art. Yet the visual echo is so precise, it creates this itch. The question isn't really whether they had light bulbs. It's a subtler question about symbolism itself. Could a symbolic image be inspired by something real they observed? If the priesthood understood some principle, a chemical reaction, a gas that illuminates, might they encode that knowledge into sacred art? This carving sits right at that intersection. It makes you ask where myth stops and observed reality might start. The problem is that question hasn't gotten serious, open-minded study. The mainstream view is so strong the alternative is just dismissed as fantasy. There's been no real effort to analyze the relief's full context, to check the surrounding inscriptions for clues, to test experimentally whether the materials they had could have produced a bright, sustained light, even as a temple wonder. So the relief becomes a test of our own flexibility. Can we look at a familiar religious symbol and ask if it holds a double meaning? The Egyptians were masters of encoding ideas. The Ankh is life, the scarab is rebirth, the Eye of Horus is protection. What if the Dendera relief was their way of encoding illumination, both spiritual and physical? It's there, carved in stone, a perfect Rorschach test. You see a beautiful myth, or you see a lost technology. and maybe the real mystery is we'll never know which is correct. Because we've decided ahead of time not to look. The Dendera relief is a debate in stone, but there's a book in Sweden that tells a different kind of story. The Codex Gigas, the Devil's Bible, it's the largest medieval manuscript anywhere, almost 3 feet tall, 1.5 feet wide, over 8 inches thick. It weighs as much as a small person. You don't read it, you confront it. The legend says one monk made it, a monk who was to be walled up alive for breaking his vows. In desperation, he promised to write a book containing all human knowledge in one night. As midnight got close, he knew he'd failed, so he prayed not to God, to the fallen angel for help. The legend says the devil finished the book for him, and the monk, in thanks, put in a full-page portrait of his benefactor. A terrifying image. The truth is more human and in some ways more strange. Scholars date it to the early 13th century. It has the complete Latin Vulgate Bible. Historical works, medical texts, a calendar. The handwriting from start to finish is the same. The same hand, the same ink, the same pressure. Analysis says it would have taken not one night but about 30 years. 30 years of continuous work for one scribe to finish. 30 years of his life, bent over vellum made from the skins of maybe 160 donkeys. That's the real puzzle, not a pact, a person. What kind of mind, what kind of devotion, or what kind of pressure could drive someone to that? A monumental, solitary task. Was it a penance, a profound act of faith, or was it, like the legend hints, a form of imprisonment, a sentence to create instead of perishing in a cell? Science has looked at its preservation, the chemistry of its inks and vellum, but it's mostly avoided the deeper question, the psychological one. What were the forces in that monastery that could demand or allow a lifetime of labor from one person? The book is a fossil of extreme human endurance, a testament to a medieval mindset where the line between divine obsession and something darker was very thin. And then there's the devil. His portrait is startling, a full-page, vivid image, the adversary alone in a blank, red frame. He's green with claws, a forked tongue. An expression of vacant power. In a holy book, it's jarring, but in the medieval world, it was a necessary counterpart. To show the glory of God, you also had to show the face of what you were resisting. The devil's inclusion might have been the ultimate act of piety, acknowledging the enemy to defeat him, but that explanation feels incomplete next to the physicality of the book. Holding it, hefting it, you feel the weight of that commitment. It stands as a monument not to supernatural aid, but to the outer limits of what a person can do. A 30-year marathon of the hand and spirit. The Codex Gigas asks us to consider the price of knowledge and the shadows that can cling to a work of pure, overwhelming light. It's less a book written by the devil and more a book written against time, against frailty, against the very limits of a single life. That solitary manuscript, 30 years in the making, shows a mind at its limit. But in Laos, the mystery isn't written by one hand. It's written by many across the whole landscape. We started with the plain of jars, but the real story is only now coming into view. For decades, we only saw a few sites, but recent surveys using satellites and ground teams have found something staggering. It's not just a few clusters of stone jars. There are over 100 sites, thousands more jars scattered across a huge region. This isn't a single cemetery, it's a network, a cultural web across the hills of northern Laos. Each site has its own character. Some jars stand in neat rows on ridgetops against the sky. Others are in forest clearings or near ancient mountain passes. That placement is the first big clue. It suggests the jars weren't just for local use. They were markers along routes. They might have defined a territory or guided travelers through a landscape that was both physical and spiritual. The people who made them were probably connected to a wider Iron Age world in Southeast Asia. trace elements in the stone could link them to quarries miles away. Their designs might echo traditions in India or over in Indonesia, but that potential for connection is still underexplored. International work here has been sparse, held back by history and by resources. So we have maps showing where the jars are, but we lack the deeper synthesis. Who were these people beyond the name we give them? What did they believe about the journey after life that required such permanent, communal vessels? Were the jars for secondary burial, for remains after the first rites? Or were they containers for fermenting rice wine, for feasts that united scattered communities? Each theory points to a complex society, shared rituals, skilled crafters, long-distance traders. Their disappearance is as quiet as their jars are monumental. No evidence of invasion, no layer of ash from a cataclysm. Their culture seems to have faded or transformed or been absorbed by later waves of migration and new ideas. They left no written records, just these silent stone sentinels, and that's the central paradox. This is a vast, open-air museum of a prehistoric civilization. A direct window into Iron Age life, death, and community. It could rewrite our understanding of early Southeast Asia, show it not as a blank space between major powers, but as a vibrant crossroads. Yet it hasn't become a focal point. The jars wait while the grand narratives of history are built elsewhere. They represent a choice in what we prioritize. To really understand this plane would need a sustained, multinational effort, not just to count jars, but to analyze soil, pollen, tools, to reconstruct the whole ecosystem of a lost world. Until that happens, the plane holds its breath. It's a library with stone books all open to the same page, waiting for enough readers to gather and piece together the full story written in the land itself. These stones and caves, these maps and mechanisms, they seem like separate riddles, but if you step back, a pattern starts to come out of the dust, a quiet conversation across continents, across thousands of years. These 20 mysteries, they aren't random. They're speaking a kind of shared language, a language of geometry, of watching the sky, of building on a massive scale. You look at the alignments, the Nazca Lines point to solstices, the Moai platforms face specific stars, the Karnak rows track the sun, Göbekli Tepe's pillars, they might have framed celestial events. That's not coincidence, it's a theme that keeps coming back. An ancient preoccupation, a deep one, with marking time and space by looking at the heavens. These cultures, separated by oceans, they all put their greatest effort into building calendars out of stone. They were mapping the cosmos onto the earth itself. Then there's the megalithic impulse, the perfect stone spheres in Costa Rica, the interlocking blocks at Sacsayhuamán, the jar fields in Laos, the underground halls in Longyou. Different forms, but a common thread, the drive to reshape the landscape on a heroic scale, not for palaces, not for forts, for purposes that feel ceremonial, communal, cosmic. It suggests a shared value, where a society's greatest expression was to collaborate on something that would outlast generations, to make a permanent mark of what they understood. And then you have the anachronisms, the Antikythera gearwork, the Baghdad jar that can produce a current, the Piri Reis Map showing an ice-free coast. The Ica stones with impossible creatures, these are the outliers, they break our timeline, they hint at pockets of knowledge, advanced astronomy, primitive electricity, cartography, anatomy, that seem to flicker in the record and then go dark. They feel like fragments of a larger library that's been lost. What if these aren't separate anomalies? What if they're scattered pieces of the same story? A story of an ancient world more interconnected than we've allowed. Ideas, techniques, myths, they could have traveled along forgotten trade routes, carried by seafarers, by nomads, by traders, long before the Silk Road had a name. A concept like precise stone fitting or a fascination with solstice alignments, it could have spread slowly, adapted by each culture to its own landscape, its own beliefs. Science, rightly, it demands solid evidence. A single artifact, no matter how baffling, isn't enough to rewrite the books. It needs context, it needs corroboration, a pattern of finds. So these singular objects, the mechanism, the battery, they get labeled as ingenious one-offs. They sit in a category of unsolved puzzles, waiting for a second example, a third, a fourth to be found. The process is cautious, it's slow, but what if that caution becomes a blind spot? The collective weight of these 20 enigmas, it suggests we might be missing the forest for the trees. We study each culture in isolation, in its own neatly labeled box on a timeline, but human curiosity, human ingenuity, it never respected those modern borders. Knowledge is fragile. It can be lost in a single cataclysm, a conquest, a famine, or just in the slow fade of a tradition when no apprentice is left to learn. These mysteries invite a different model, not of linear progress from primitive to advanced, but of a world where sophisticated understanding arose, flourished in specific places and times, and then receded. Like waves on a shore, the ideas didn't vanish completely. They became myth, they became legend, or silent craftsmanship passed down without explanation. The Dendera relief might not be a light bulb blueprint, but could it be a symbolic echo? An echo of a real, lost technique for creating light. The Dropa stone's story might be fantasy, but does it cloak a genuine discovery? A discovery about a lost mountain people's way of recording things. This isn't about proving aliens. It isn't about lost super civilizations. It's about humility. It's acknowledging that the ancient mind was capable of profound, systematic thought we are still struggling to decode. Their priorities were different. They sought harmony with the cosmos, continuity with ancestors, meaning in the landscape. Their technology served those goals, and that resulted in achievements our modern framework, focused on industry and power, sometimes fails to recognize as technology at all. The pattern these mysteries reveal is a whisper that says our past is deeper, richer, and more connected than the records show. It asks us to look at the gaps not as empty spaces but as doors. Doors waiting for a key we haven't thought to try. The next great discovery might not be a new artifact. It might be a new way of seeing the connections between the ones we already have. We walk through these forgotten places, and what you come away with is a quiet thought. The past isn't a straight line from primitive to advanced. It's more like a landscape. Peaks and valleys, lights that flare up and then go dark. These 20 mysteries, they're not just oddities, they're signposts. They point to this huge, uncharted territory of human capability. Each one, from the Antikythera gearwork to the silent jaws in Laos, asks you to reconsider something basic, the assumption that we understand history's trajectory. These artifacts stand as evidence. They're proof of minds that solved problems we thought were beyond them. They achieved precision, scale, insight, things that still give us pause. Their existence is a kind of gift, a gift of humility. It reminds you that knowledge isn't a permanent possession. It can be lost, it can be forgotten. It can sleep for centuries in a museum basement under jungle vines, waiting for someone to look with new eyes. Science, in its necessary caution, often sidelines these things. These anomalies, they disrupt the clean narrative. They demand explanations that aren't in the textbooks yet, but to ignore them is to close a door. These puzzles persist because they matter. They're beacons for the curious. They urge you not to accept the map as the territory. The real work of history isn't just cataloging what we know. It's having the courage to explore the blank spaces on the map. What we call a mystery is often just a question we haven't learned how to ask. The language of the ancients wasn't always words. It was stone alignments to track stars. Vessels carved for rituals we can only glimpse, machinery to model the heavens. To hear them, you have to learn to listen in geometries. in materials. In the sheer ambition of their projects, this dialogue with the past, it's never finished. Every generation brings new tools, new perspectives. Satellite imagery reveals lost cities. Ground-penetrating radar finds hidden chambers. Genetic analysis traces forgotten migrations. The stories are still being written. The greatest discovery isn't a single object. It's a shift in understanding, a willingness to see the ancient world as a web, interconnected, sophisticated cultures, capable of genius in forms we're still learning to recognize. So let these mysteries linger. Let them spark your own curiosity. Which one speaks to you? Is it the silent clockwork of the ancient Greeks, the vast network of stone jars? The coded pages of an unreadable book? Share your thoughts. The conversation is what keeps history alive. It's what turns a forgotten artifact back into a message. Our exploration may pause here, but the path doesn't end. There are always more questions waiting just beyond the light, more secrets resting in the earth. In the sea, in the silent stars they once watched so carefully, the next chapter is yours to uncover. Stay curious.